When my mother-in-law first looked at me and said, in a calm but cold voice, that I was too poor to marry her son, I remember smiling instead of defending myself, because sometimes the deepest pain enters the heart so quietly that you do not even know where it will settle. I never imagined that the first day I walked into their home, holding a small box of sweets and nervous hope, would become the memory that shaped my entire journey with this family. I can still see the way the living room looked that afternoon, sunlight falling softly through the curtains, the quiet hum of a ceiling fan, and me sitting on the edge of their sofa with my hands folded on my lap. My future husband, Daniel, kept giving me small, reassuring glances, as if he knew his mother was preparing her words like sharp needles. She observed me from head to toe, her expression measured, almost polite, but her eyes carrying a judgment I felt on my skin. "What do you do?" asked, though I knew she already had an idea. "I work in administration," I said gently. It was not a lie, but it was not the full truth either. I owned the company, but I worked with my employees like one of them, because I always believed that leadership is not about standing above people but standing with them. Still, I never mentioned the ownership, because I never felt the need to introduce myself through titles or wealth. Her lips tightened as if she was hearing exactly what she expected. She nodded slowly, then leaned back in her chair like someone preparing for a verdict. "My son needs stability," she said. "He needs someone who can offer him a comfortable life, not someone who will depend on him." The room suddenly felt heavier, the air pressing against my chest. Daniel started to speak, but I gently touched his hand to stop him. I wanted her to continue, to speak her truth, even if it hurt. She looked at me with an expression that was neither cruel nor warm, it was simply certain. "You seem kind," she said, "but kindness is not enough. Marriage requires security, and security requires money. I am not sure your background can give him that." Her words echoed inside me for a long moment. I felt a small twist in my stomach, not because of what she thought of me, but because she spoke as if she already knew the entire story of my life, as if she had taken one look and decided who I was. I took a slow breath and smiled, though my chest felt tight. "I understand," I said softly. And I did. People fear what they do not know, they judge what they cannot see. I grew up modestly. After losing my parents in my early 20s, I learned to survive on very little, and every step forward came from my own effort. I started my company with a single rented room and borrowed furniture, sometimes working late into the night with only a cheap desk lamp keeping me company. The early years were lonely, but they taught me perseverance, patience, and humility. Over time, my company grew. Slowly at first, then steadily, then unexpectedly fast. But despite all that success, I never changed the way I presented myself. I wore simple clothes, avoided showing off, and lived quietly. Wealth felt safer when nobody knew about it. So when my mother-in-law judged me, I knew she was not rejecting me, she was rejecting the image she assumed I represented. That made the pain deeper. Sitting in her living room, I kept thinking that she would understand me one day, not because I wanted her approval, but because I wanted her to see that people can be more than their outward simplicity. After that first meeting, Daniel walked me outside, his hand wrapping around mine protectively. "I am sorry," he whispered. His voice shook a little, and I felt the warmth of his sincerity. I looked into his eyes and saw the man I loved, honest and gentle, caught between two worlds, his mother's expectations and his heart's choice. "It is all right," I said simply. "Your mother cares for you, I cannot blame her for that." We stood in silence near the car, the late afternoon breeze brushing softly against us. I knew he was struggling, torn inside by the idea that loving me meant disappointing her. I placed my hand on his cheek. "I do not need her approval today," I said quietly. "One day she will know who I really am. For now, let us move forward gently." He nodded, but I could feel the heaviness in his heart. The next few weeks were filled with small but painful reminders. His mother would call him and ask questions about my job, about my family, about my finances. Sometimes she would speak softly, but I could hear the doubt hidden behind each word. Once I walked into the hallway while Daniel was on the phone, and I overheard her say, "She is good, but she is not enough for you." I leaned against the wall quietly and closed my eyes. It is strange how words can hurt even when they come from someone who does not truly know you. Still, I stayed silent. I believed time would become my voice. As the days went by, I noticed small changes in Daniel too. He became gentler, more protective, always trying to reassure me with small gestures. He would bring me flowers after work, make me tea when I looked tired, hold my hand longer than before. It was as if he wanted to build a shield around me, something soft and warm that could protect me from his mother's judgment. But the truth was, the judgment had already settled inside me, and it followed me silently like a shadow. When our wedding day finally came, she attended with a forced smile, offering a polite hug and avoiding long conversations with me. I told myself it was fine, that misunderstandings often take time to heal. But even on that day, I noticed the way she held her purse close to her, as if guarding it from someone untrustworthy. I wondered if she would ever see me differently. What she did not know, what she could not imagine, was that I had already seen her many times before she met me. She worked in the administration department of my company. I never interacted directly with that team, but I knew the names of every employee. I had passed by her desk several times without her noticing me, because to her, I was just another young woman walking through the hallway. I never introduced myself because I wanted to observe my employees naturally, but now I wondered if fate had brought us together long before I even met her son. And sometimes I asked myself a quiet question. If she knew who I really was, would she have spoken to me the same way? Or would everything be different? I carried that question inside me as I stepped into my new life as a wife, hoping one day the truth would reveal itself at the right moment, not to hurt her, but to help her see that people are never as small as they appear from the outside. That was the beginning of our story. A beginning shaped by misunderstanding, quiet pain, and a hope that someday she would know the truth that lived behind my simple clothes and gentle silence. The first month after the wedding felt like walking through a quiet field where the wind carried both warmth and uncertainty, as if every step forward came with a soft reminder of the tension I had tried so hard to ignore. Daniel and I moved into a small apartment we both loved, with light wooden floors and a balcony that caught the morning sun. Every day I woke up beside him, listening to the gentle rhythm of his breathing, and I felt grateful for the peace he brought into my life. But beneath that peace, I could not ignore the silent distance that lingered between his mother and me. She rarely visited, and when she did, her eyes scanned our home in a slow, thoughtful way, as if she was measuring the space and quietly asking herself how long I could maintain it. She would touch the edges of the dining table, look at the simple curtains, examine the small decorations I placed around the living room. "You keep things clean," she once said. It sounded like a compliment, but the tone carried a different message, something like surprise that someone like me could create a home that looked stable, organized, and warm. I smiled and made tea, trying to bridge the gap with small gestures. But every conversation felt guarded, like we were both walking on thin ice, careful not to crack the fragile surface beneath us. I kept telling myself to be patient. I believed time could soften anything if handled gently. One afternoon, Daniel came home late, looking tired and thoughtful. He loosened his tie and sat beside me on the couch, resting his head on my shoulder. "My mother called me today," he said quietly. I already knew those words would carry weight. "What did she say?" I asked, keeping my voice calm even though a small knot formed in my stomach. "She asked me if I was happy," he replied. "Then she asked if I felt pressured, financially." He hesitated before saying the last word. I placed my hand on his. "What did you tell her?" "That we are happy, that you and I share everything, that we support each other." He paused. "But she keeps insisting I deserve someone who can help me build a better life." The knot inside me tightened. I took a slow breath, not to calm myself from anger but from sadness. "She says those things because she cares for you," I said softly. "Her fears are louder than her trust." Daniel looked at me, his eyes filled with concern. "Does it bother you?" He asked gently. "It hurts," I admitted. "But I can handle hurt. What I fear is that her words will create cracks between us." He held my hand tighter. "Nothing can crack what we have," he whispered. His assurance brought warmth to my heart, but a small part of me wondered how long we could keep shielding ourselves from the storm outside. A few days later, something unexpected happened, something small, but powerful enough to shift the balance inside me. I arrived at my office early, around 7:30 a.m., hoping to catch up on some paperwork before the day became busy. As I walked through the quiet hallway past the desks and office chairs, I noticed someone sitting alone. It was my mother-in-law. She was dressed in a simple cardigan and holding a coffee mug, staring at her computer screen with a tired expression. She didn't see me approaching. I paused for a moment, watching her silently. In that stillness, she didn't look like the confident woman who had judged me so easily. She looked human, a little weary, a little worried, maybe even vulnerable. I gently stepped back before she could notice me. I walked toward my office and sat down, but something heavy rested on my heart. Seeing her like that made me realize how much of her world I had never known. She was a widow. She had built her son's life with her own hands. She worked long hours. She carried fears quietly. She protected Daniel fiercely because she had raised him alone. The more I thought about it, the more I understood that her judgment didn't come from cruelty. It came from survival. She worried that a woman like me, a woman she believed had so little, might bring instability into her son's life. Understanding her fear didn't erase the hurt, but it softened something inside me. That night I told Daniel what I saw. "She works so hard," I said quietly. "She carries a lot on her shoulders." He nodded slowly. She always has. We sat in silence for a moment before he leaned closer and kissed my forehead. You see her, he whispered, even when she doesn't see you. His words stayed with me. A week later, she invited us to dinner at her house. It was the first invitation since the wedding, and I felt a mix of hope and caution. Her home was small but tidy, with framed family photos on the walls and the soft smell of fresh soup drifting from the kitchen. When she opened the door, she looked surprised to see me holding flowers, but she accepted them with a polite nod. Dinner was calm, almost peaceful. We talked about simple things, the weather, work, small errands. But even in that softness, I felt her watching me, studying me the way someone studies a puzzle they cannot quite solve. At one point, she asked, "Do you ever worry about the future?" Her tone was not harsh this time. It was curious. I nodded gently. Of course, I said. Everyone worries. She looked at her bowl, tracing the rim with her finger. Worry makes people protective, she said quietly, almost as if she were talking to herself. The moment felt fragile, like a thin glass placed between us. I wanted to tell her everything, that I was not who she thought, that I had more stability than she imagined, that her son was not at risk. But something inside me said, not yet. The truth needed the right moment, not to shock her, but to help her see me clearly. So I answered softly, I understand. When we left her home that night, she stood at the doorway a little longer than usual, watching us walk down the steps. For the first time, I felt a small shift in her gaze, not acceptance, not warmth, but maybe the beginning of something that could one day grow into trust. And even though the road ahead was still uncertain, I walked beside Daniel with a quiet hope inside me, believing that the truth would soon find its own way into the light. The change I sensed during that dinner lingered gently in the air, like a soft breeze that touches the skin but does not fully settle. And in the days that followed, I noticed small shifts. Subtle, almost fragile signs that my mother-in-law was beginning to see me not as a threat to her son's stability, but as someone simply trying to build a life beside him. She started calling Daniel a little more often, not to question him about finances or responsibilities, but to ask if we had eaten, or how our week had been, or whether the weather was too cold for us to walk home from work. Sometimes she would speak to me directly, her voice always measured but not sharp like before. I saw a recipe you might like, she once told me, sending a picture of a simple soup. It was not affection, not yet, but it was no longer rejection. And I appreciated every step, every effort she made, even the smallest ones, because I knew such changes often come slowly for someone who has lived her whole life, protecting everything she loves with quiet intensity. Still, even with those changes, a deep truth lived beneath the surface. She still did not know who I really was. One morning, something happened that pushed that truth closer to the light. Something so unexpected, I spent hours afterward deciding whether it was time to reveal everything. I arrived at work earlier than usual, hopping to finish a proposal before the rest of the team arrived. The building was silent, the hallways peaceful, and the office lights still dim. When I reached the main floor, I saw my mother-in-law standing beside her desk with a worried expression, holding a stack of papers. She didn't see me at first, so I took a few steps closer before gently saying, "Good morning." She looked up quickly, startled for a moment, then nodded with a forced smile. "You're here early," she said. Her voice sounded softer today, but something troubled her. "Are you all right?" I asked, keeping my tone calm. She sighed and sat down, placing the papers on her desk. "I made a mistake yesterday," she said quietly. "I mixed up some documents and they got sent to the wrong department. I'm afraid it might cause a problem." She rubbed her forehead, looking tired and unsure. And for the first time, I saw a version of her that was not guarded, not stern, but vulnerable, like someone who had carried too much for far too long. I walked closer and picked up the papers gently. "Let me take a look," I said. She hesitated, her fingers tightening for a second. "I don't want you to get involved," she murmured. "It's my responsibility." "I know," I said softly. "But sometimes responsibility feels lighter when shared." She looked at me with an expression I had never seen from her before, something between confusion and wonder, as if she was seeing a part of me she had missed all this time. Slowly, she let go. I reviewed the documents and realized the mistake was simple to fix. Nothing serious, nothing damaging. I made a few notes and handed the papers back to her. "It's not a big issue," I said. "You can send these corrections to the department head, and it will be fine." Relief washed over her face. "Thank you," she whispered, almost too softly to hear. The gratitude in her voice touched something deep within me. "You're welcome," I replied with a warm smile. As I walked to my office, I felt a quiet ache inside. She was struggling more than she showed. She carried worries alone. And still, she believed I was too weak, too poor, too unstable to stand beside her son. The irony of it pressed against my heart. Later that week, Daniel and I invited her to spend Sunday with us. We kept the day simple: homemade lunch, a walk in the park, gentle conversations. The sun was warm, families were laughing around us, and everything felt peaceful. At one point, she and I walked a few steps ahead of Daniel. She noticed a group of young couples with children running around, and she smiled faintly. "You will make a good mother one day," she said quietly. I was surprised by the softness of her voice. "Thank you," I said. Looked straight ahead, her eyes following a little boy who was chasing a balloon. "I didn't have help when Daniel was little," she said. "I worked long hours, I worried every day, I tried to be both mother and father." Her voice trembled just a little. Maybe I became too protective. I listened carefully, letting her speak at her own pace. She continued, "When I met you, I was afraid. Not of you, but of losing the stability I fought so hard to build for him." For the first time, she admitted it. All crack in her armor, a glimpse of her heart. "I understand," I said softly. "You love him deeply," she nodded. "He is all I have." Her confession sank into me. I finally saw her not as someone judging me, but as a mother terrified of repeating the hardships she once faced. When we reached a bench, we both sat down. The park was quiet around us, just the sound of leaves rustling gently. After a long pause, she asked a question that surprised me. "Do you ever think about the future? About how you and Daniel will build your life?" I nodded slowly. "Yes," I said. "I think about it often." She looked at me thoughtfully. "And you're not afraid?" I smiled softly. "Fear is natural, but I believe in building things with patience, one day at a time." She lowered her gaze, absorbing my words. In that moment, I felt something shift between us, not acceptance, not approval, but the beginning of understanding. When we drove her home that evening, she stood at her doorway again, watching us with eyes that held something gentler than before. Daniel squeezed my hand on the way back. "She's changing," he whispered. "Not because she has to," I said, "but because she's finally seeing the truth of who we are," he smiled. "She will love you one day." I didn't answer. But inside, I hoped he was right. Still, the truth, the real truth about who I was, remained tucked quietly in my heart. Not because I feared her reaction, but because I wanted her to meet the real me first, not the idea she had created. I knew the moment of revelation would come soon, and when it did, her world would shift in a way she never expected. And I only wished that when that day arrived, she would see the truth not as a triumph for me, but as a lesson for both of us. One that might finally bring us closer than we had ever been before. The moment of truth arrived on a rainy Thursday morning, almost quietly, without warning or grand build-up, as if life had decided the time had come for everything hidden to step into the light. I was seated in my office, reviewing quarterly reports, when I heard a soft knock on the door. At first, I thought it was my assistant, but when I looked up, I saw my mother-in-law standing hesitantly in the doorway. She looked unsure, as if she was entering a space she had never imagined herself walking into. She held a small envelope in her hand, her fingers trembling slightly. "Am I disturbing you?" she asked gently. Her voice was different, hesitant, respectful, almost careful. "Not at all," I said with a soft smile. "Please come in." She stepped inside slowly, her eyes scanning the office, stopping briefly at the nameplate on my desk. I saw her lips freeze, her eyes widen ever so slightly. It was the first time she had ever noticed it. The name she had never connected to the company she worked for, the name she only knew as her daughter-in-law. She blinked as if trying to confirm what she was seeing. "You work here?" she asked, her voice faint, almost shaky. I nodded. "Yes, I've been here for many years." She swallowed hard. "But this office, this position," her sentence broke. She looked from the walls to the desk to me, unable to piece the truth together. I spoke gently. "Please sit. I think it's time you knew everything." She sat slowly, and I could see the confusion turning into realization, then disbelief. I took a breath, keeping my tone calm and kind. "This company, the one you have worked for all these years, is mine." The silence that followed was deep, almost heavy. She stared at me, her eyes slowly filling with shock, not anger, not pride, just pure astonishment that seemed to echo inside the room. "Yours," she whispered, barely audible. "Yes," I replied softly. "Inherited it from my father. I kept my identity private because I wanted to earn my place honestly. I wanted people to see my work before they saw my name." She covered her mouth with her hand as her eyes began to glisten. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I truly didn't know." Tears gathered at the corners of her eyes, and she looked down at her lap, ashamed. "All this time, all the things I said, I thought you had nothing. I thought you could not take care of Daniel. I judged you so harshly." Her voice trembled, and she shook her head slowly. "How could I have been so wrong?" I reached across the desk and gently placed my hand on hers. "You were protecting your son," I said softly. "A mother's fear is not something to blame, it's something to understand." She looked up, surprised by my kindness. Her tears fell silently. "But I hurt you," she whispered. "I made you feel small." I nodded slowly. "Yes, it hurt, but I never wanted you to feel guilty. I just wanted time. Time for you to know me as a person, not as a title or a position." She wiped her tears quickly, trying to compose herself. Why didn't you tell me earlier? She asked. I paused, choosing my words carefully. Because I didn't want you to respect me because of money. I wanted you to see my heart first. I wanted you to see the way I loved your son. She closed her eyes for a moment, as if letting my words sink deep into her. When she opened them again, her voice was softer, gentler. And I have seen it, she said. Slowly, slowly, I have seen the way you speak to him, the way you support him, the way you hold your home together with quiet strength. I saw it long before I saw this office. She took a deep breath, her voice trembling again. I was wrong about you. I smiled gently. We all make mistakes when we are afraid. She reached out and held my hand tightly, a gesture she had never initiated before. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for being patient with me. Thank you for not giving up on me. Tears filled my own eyes, not from pain, but from the weight of forgiveness settling between us like warm light after a long storm. We're family, I said quietly. And family grows little by little. After a long pause, she stood slowly, walked around the desk, and embraced me. It was a fragile, trembling embrace, but it held years of fear, years of misunderstanding, and the beginning of something new: trust. When she finally stepped back, she looked at me with a gentle smile. Daniel is lucky, she said. Not because you own all of this, but because he found someone who understands that true strength is quiet. I walked her to the elevator, and before the doors closed, she touched my arm lightly. Will you come for dinner tonight? She asked. There was no hesitation in her voice this time, no guarded tone, just a warm invitation from one woman to another. Of course, I said. That evening, she welcomed me into her home with an ease I had never felt before. She served me food with her own hands, asked about my day, shared memories of Daniel's childhood, and laughed softly as she spoke. And I knew this was the beginning of a new chapter, not written in fear or judgment, but in understanding. As the night ended and we prepared to leave, she held my hand and whispered, I hope you can forgive me. I smiled. I already have. On the drive back home, rain tapped gently on the car windows, and Daniel looked at me with quiet curiosity. Something changed today, he said. I nodded, feeling warmth bloom in my chest. Yes, I whispered. The truth came out, and it healed more than it hurt. When we reached home, I stood by the window, watching the soft rain fall under the streetlights. And in that moment, I felt a deep realization settle within me. Sometimes people judge because they are afraid of losing what they love. Sometimes they speak harshly because their hearts are tired. And sometimes, the best answer is not pride or confrontation, but patience, quiet kindness, and the grace to let people grow at their own pace. That night, I closed my eyes with a gentle heart, grateful for the lesson life had taught me. True understanding begins when we choose compassion over ego, and family becomes stronger when love is allowed to replace fear.